Welcome to the Sunday Driver and a review of the 2015 Nissan GT-R. We're going to go through this car bit by bit, the pros and the cons, and find out what it's exactly about. But in a nutshell, there's a lot of cars which will corner and brake just as hard as a GT-R, but there's only a few which will accelerate like this car. And that brings in a very exciting dynamic to your daily driving, the ability to be traction limited coming out of corners. When you get on the gas coming out of corners, the back end will wiggle and it will step out if you're not careful. Now you might be saying, it's all-wheel drive. Yeah, it is all-wheel drive, but it's rear-biased all-wheel drive. This is probably the best all-wheel drive system you can get. I mean, 911 turbo notwithstanding, but it's totally different than any all-wheel drive you're used to driving. When I get on the gas in my Golf R, it'll plow, it'll push wide, it'll get into an understeer. That's certainly not the case with this car. When you get on the gas, it feels like a rear-wheel drive car and the back end starts stepping out. Exciting stuff. So, all-wheel drive won't save you coming out of corners, but you still got VDC, Vehicle Dynamic Control, or Stability Control. Now, you got three settings for that. You've got the normal mode, you got the R mode, or race mode, and then you got off. That's pretty much suicidal. The VDC is programmed quite playfully, even in normal mode. So combined with the power and the VDC programming, I found the normal gave me plenty of slip angle, and it stepped in reasonably authoritatively when things got a little out of control. Now, if you're more on the dangerous side, you still have the R mode, and in fact, if you want to do launch control, you do have to select the R mode for stability control. But we're getting lost in the minutiae of this car. Let's take a step back and see what kind of driver would actually enjoy the Nissan GT-R. What do we know about this car? Well, it's great at doing laps around the Nürburgring Nordschleife, puts down great times, but that doesn't help most of us since we don't live anywhere close to the Nürburgring. I figure there's three types of drivers who would enjoy this car. Number one is a speed demon. We know this car has an amazing top speed, over 300 kilometers per hour. Number two is the track rat. Short of Lamborghini or Ferrari, I don't think you're going to get this kind of performance on the track. And number three is a backroad bomber with Canyon carber. Great backroad car. If you want to rerun a piece of road, it's easy to turn around. The approach angles are good. You have a backup camera. Let's go through some of the pros and the cons of this car. Pro number one, power. Lots of it, anytime you want, any RPM range. But it's not all that great because you also get a lot of turbo lag. The engine takes a while to spool up. When you step on the gas, you don't get that direct control of the engine. You're controlling the boost level. So, yeah, it's laggy. You don't get that toe tip control of the back wheels that you get in a naturally aspirated car or V8. And also the engine noise. It's terrible. It sounds really bad for a car. I mean, I guess it's good for a vacuum cleaner, but for a car, it sounds terrible. So if you're trying to rev at people, maybe you see some pretty girls or you want to rev at some other cars, just don't even bother. It's going to sound like crap. Best thing about engine noise, though, is just a blow-off valve. If you like a psh, psh sound, then this is a car for you. Besides the power and the speed, what impressed me most in this vehicle was the steering and ergonomics. This car has an old-school hydraulic rack, so it's a lot easier. It's a lot lighter in steering than the electric racks, but it's got great feedback. I mean, all I could feel through the steering wheel was what the front wheels were doing. The steering is not corrupted in any way, shape, or form by the all-wheel drive system. The two negatives to the steering will be that the car doesn't track as straight as I'm used to in my electric rack cars. You have to constantly make small little adjustments, so that can perhaps make it feel a little nervous. But the positives override the negatives by a large margin in the steering department. The one issue I did have, though, is just how the car goes around corners. It doesn't, quote, lock in like some cars do. I remember I had a Ford Focus diesel manual on a road trip in Ireland, and that car locked in really good. You turned in, the car took a set, and it just felt glued to the corner. Same thing with a Porsche GT-4. When you turn in and you go around the corner, it feels locked into the corner, and it just makes you feel good inside. Well, disappointingly, this car didn't quite have that same locked-in feeling. The ergonomics are great in this car. You got a great driving position with the steering wheel nice and close. The steering wheel is super adjustable and reach and angle. It really comes out a long ways towards you. There's actually two little switches, two little levers underneath the car. When you got to open them both up, one lever will let you control the angle, the other lever will let you control the reach. The seats were fantastic, super grippy for cornering. My seats were cloth and really held you down tight. I mean, felt like a full-on racing seat. The seat back is not supportive, however. It seems like the back my back sinks into the seat instead of the seat pushing back on me. And there's also no lumbar adjustment on the seat. Alright, it's time to talk transmission. Dual clutch, 6-speed transmission. Back in 2007 when the car came out, I'm sure it was the latest and greatest, but 10 years later, it's time to show its age. First of all, it's a 6-speed. Porsche PDK is now 7-speed. Corvette ZL1 is coming out with a 10-speed automatic. So 6-speed is a little outdated, but that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that the transmission's clunky. Did not like automatic mode at all. It seemed to be poor at reading what I was trying to do. For example, I gave it a little bit of gas, and the car would downshift, and I'm like, hey, I didn't want to downshift. You don't need to downshift. You got all this torque on hand. Also clunky when switching from reverse to drive. Felt like a tank or a truck where you select it and then you wait and then it will actually change it to gearbox. So you got to be careful with that, right? You think you got into D, but hey, you're still in reverse. So don't hit the gas immediately. Just wait for the gearbox to shift. The transmission does a lot better in manual mode, with manual control with the paddles. Two issues. Probably the biggest issue is if you slam on the brakes. Maybe you see a moose or a deer or a law enforcement, and you slow down a whole bunch. The gearbox is slow to catch up to get you into the proper gear. So you might have to help out with the downshift paddles, or it'll be clunky once you go to accelerate again after your deceleration. It will not upshift when you get the red line. It's hard to judge when you're getting to red line. There is, if the sound doesn't really help you, there is some lights that come on in the dash. First you get a yellow light, then you get a red light, then you get a rev limiter. I felt the car shrink around me when back road driving in terms of size and weight. It's called Godzilla, but I didn't feel that at any time that it was too big or too heavy. The approach angles, the front lip clearance are excellent. It's easy to whip around just like a regular car. It's not like a pure sports car where you're always worried about lip clearance and, sucking up your seat cushions anytime you're maneuvering onto driveways. Visibility was pretty good. You also get a rear view camera to help you out. It is kind of low resolution, and there's no cover on it like my Golf R. The camera is underneath a VW symbol, so it's all covered up. It stays nice and clean. That's not the case in the GT-R. Your camera will get dirty and you'll hardly see out of it, but hey, it's better than nothing. Alright, we've reached the Q&A part of the show. This is where I answer some of your questions. First question talks about ability to induce oversteer at will, especially when city driving. Can I hoon it a little bit? Can I kick the tail end out? No. This car is not a good hoon car. It really has too much grip and too much turbo lag to have the precision required to hoon the car and power slide it coming around corners. What kind of fuel economy did you get? When I was driving Spirited, I was getting 7.2 mile per gallon, which is about 30 liters per 100 kilometer. Does this car make a great Grand Tourer? Meaning, can I lap up the highway miles in comfort? No, I don't think it's really good Grand Tourer. The biggest issue is probably the road noise, the tire noise you get at speed. Several times on the highway, I found myself trying to shift up a gear. I was already in 6, but my mind's saying, just make this car go a little quieter. And I don't think the engine noise was the biggest culprit. The biggest culprit was the tire noise. But yeah, once you get on the highway, she's just loud. How was the launch control, and were there any issues? The launch control is pretty good. Obviously, it's nowhere as good as 911 Turbo, but it will impress. It will impress. It doesn't scare you. It just impresses. There was one issue. I only did about 2 or 3 launches, and I was separated by regular driving in between, and I still had a center diff overheat message. Car asked me to stop driving until the system cools off, and that took about 2 to 4 minutes. What are the differences with the new 2017 model year GT-R compared to your 2015? Well, there's 3 changes that I know about. The first one is the exhaust. The 2017 has a titanium exhaust. Also a new interior. They're trying to spruce up the interior. The shift paddles on the 2017 are attached to the steering wheel, and they move with the wheel, versus in the 2015 and earlier cars, the paddles were fixed at the 9 and 3. They did not move as you rotated the wheel. And also in the new car, they cleaned up the clutter of buttons on your dash. They took the GPS control button, they moved it off the dashboard next to your shifter. Well, there you go. There's a 2015 Nissan GT-R all wrapped up for you. Brilliant car when driven like an absolute lunatic, but perhaps not so good when driven like a normal human being. Now, what are some cars you would consider instead of this car? If you want all-wheel drive, I would consider the Golf R. Yeah, it's half the power, but it's also less than half the cost. And the all-wheel drive system is nowhere as good as a GT-R. In the Golf R, it's front biased all-wheel drive. If you want the speed and the power, but also you want better noises, I would consider Mustang GT350, I consider Corvette Z06, or Camaro ZL1. Thanks for tuning in to The Sunday Driver. Hope you enjoyed the review. If you have any questions, please ask them below. I'll be happy to answer them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. New videos coming up whatever I get around to making them. Lots of cars to review. And in fact, if there is any cars you'd like me to review, please comment below. Thanks again, and later.